Yep. All right, I'd like to, this is Bill Olson of the Olson, Zalewski, Wynner LLP law firm, and you are attending the year-end planning for solo and small firms, and I'll act as a moderator as well as being the first speaker. As such moderation will go. The title is Year-End Planning for Solo and Small Firms, and the first presentation is mine on Big Picture Strategic Planning for Solo and Small Firms. I'll be followed by Jeff Lapin of Lapin Law Offices, and he'll be discussing law practice management considerations such as physical plant, software, and insurance, followed by Jeanelle Lust of Knudsen, Berkheimer, Richardson, and Endacott LLP here in Lincoln, and she will be discussing human resources, compensation, and evaluation issues, followed by Reginald Kuhn of the Mattson Ricketts law firm in Lincoln, who will be discussing tax considerations for solo and small firms. And that being said, we'll just kind of follow the PowerPoint. I may go off the PowerPoint at some point. That would make it, I guess, a PowerPoint point. Before I get started, I'd like to refer everybody to one or two books that are very beneficial for solo and small firm practitioners and their planning process, both year-end as well as ongoing. The first of all is a book called Minding Your Own Business, The Solo and Small Firm Lawyer's Guide to a Profitable Practice by Ann M. Gwynn, and it's published by the ABA General Practice Solo and Small Firm Division, and you can buy that through the ABA site. I'm using this in a class I teach on law office management at the law school second semester, and it's very, very beneficial on planning, budgeting, marketing, etc. And the other one is a book that's been around for a long time, is now in its 6th edition, on an e-version. Frankly, I think you'll be more happy with the 5th edition, which is paperback, although it's about 12 or 13 years old now, and that's by Jay Funberg, and it's called How to Start and Build Your Law Practice, and he has been around a long time doing consulting, and that one is also published by the ABA on the volume, the 5th version of it, 5th edition. The other one, the e-version, you have to get directly from his website. And with that, let's get started. Since I'm talking about strategic planning, I think it's always beneficial to discuss what the year-end planning should consist of. And frankly, if you don't have access to your firm history for the last year, you need to make a history. So what you need to do is get out your books and start looking at it. But I'm assuming that you've got books and you can look at your financial information for the last year. And the question you have to ask yourself when you're doing strategic planning at year-end is, does your firm conduct a year-end review? That year-end review can include partners only, and when I say partners, I'm talking about shareholders, LLC members, the owners only. Do you include associate attorneys or contract attorneys? Do you include staff? Why would you do this? Well, I think it's beneficial to have an owners meeting to discuss how the year has gone, and you should have that sometime in December. January is fine too, but you need to have it in that period once you know what the year has done. Because if you don't know where you've been, it's kind of hard to figure out where you want to go. And I think the owners should meet, and then I firmly believe that you should bring in any associate attorneys that have been around for at least that year into the planning and the year-end review. You don't have to divulge, if you're the owner, every financial bit of information, but that's why you differentiate between a partners-only meeting and an associate attorneys meeting. And then what about the staff? Well, I firmly believe, and I think everybody, whoever does any of this kind of work, believes that you need to include staff in a year-end review too. Not only for their salaries, which I think Jeff will be talking about, but also for expectations for the coming year. Also, as we get into a little bit later on whether we need additional staff, you need additional staff, whether the staff is meeting your expectations, and maybe duty assignments. The question also comes up, did you meet regularly during the year? At least the owners meet during the year regularly. I know my office, every office I've been involved in, and that's been a long time ago in 4 different law firms, we have always met regularly during the year. Usually it's monthly, sometimes bi-weekly. Depending on how you structure your law firm, it may be more often, but I think at least monthly. Have a meeting, even if it's an hour long. You need to be able to discuss things like, how are your accounts receivable? What's the cash flow look like? What cases are pending? Do you have any bills you want to send out that have been in the works that you haven't done monthly billing on because they've been a different kind of bill, where you might want to discuss with your partners whether to add a premium to that of some sort or other. You keep agendas of those meetings. Very important to keep agendas to decide what you're going to talk about so people know in advance and they can think about it. Agendas should be handed out, I think, a week or two in advance if you can, and that certainly goes true for the year-end review and your planning for the next year. Did you keep minutes of that meeting? I don't think you need to keep minutes of everything everybody says, but any important decisions, you should definitely keep minutes, and that certainly goes for strategic planning. And probably the most important thing is, did you address any problems that were raised at that meeting or those meetings, and if so, did you plan for what to do with them? And that goes for year-end planning for the next year in particular, and were those problems discussed going forward? Did you budget last year? Because budgeting on strategic planning is one of the 2 or 3 most important things you need to do. By budgeting, I'm talking about looking at what your ongoing expenses have been, what you think they're going to be going forward, what your extraordinary expenses are, when those occur during the year. Obviously you've got a rent, or if you're renting space, or if you're buying space, you may have a mortgage payment that's the same every month, and you certainly have occupancy expenses even if you own your own building and don't have any rent to pay or mortgage. Staff salaries are set for the year generally. Sometimes you change some staff salaries in the middle of the year, but those are ongoing expenses on a monthly basis. Did you revise or meet the changes in your financial picture during the year? For instance, if you are making X number of dollars per month on average coming into your firm for revenue, and you get a huge payment through a contingency fee case or a transaction that pays at the end of the deal, did you build that into your budget? And if not, should you build it in going forward? How do you allocate that going forward? And is it a kind of recurring thing, or is it a one-time deal that you shouldn't include in your budget for the next year? Frankly, a lot of firms don't keep very historic numbers except on the tax return. If you don't have QuickBooks or some kind of software to do it, you should install software, and it should be in your planning process so you can keep historic numbers even if it's on an Excel spreadsheet. We have in our firm, and firm since 1984, we have used a version of Software Technologies General Ledger system, which we are currently using also. And from that and our tab software, we have numbers from years and years and years gone by, and we can look at those. We can look at them on a monthly basis, and year end we look at them. But also, even if you have the numbers, do you understand those numbers? One, income and expenses are one thing, but attorney production is another. Do you understand what gross billings versus actual collections means, and what that number transposes to in terms of hourly rates? Will you budget for next year? I'm sure there are many law firms across the state of Nebraska and nationally that don't actually do a budget. Small firms especially, and solos really especially, because they don't think they need to. I firmly believe in a budget, even if you have a hard time coming up with what your expected revenue is going to be. You're going to know what your expenses are. At least get those on the picture, and then work backwards from that if you can, and take a look at your last 2 or 3 years of income going forward and figure out what you've been earning on an average basis and put that into your budget for the next year and start with that baseline. If you know there's going to be some big hits, put them in where you think they're going to be. The biggest problem we have had in budgeting is the extraordinary expenses that occasionally occur. So we budget for those by putting away a certain dollar amount every month. Those expenses would be include the one-time per year professional liability insurance, bar dues that take a big hit if you've got a lot of lawyers in the firm. Those kinds of once-a-year expenses, we budget for them on a monthly basis, but know when they're going to be paid. What did the numbers tell you about the future? I think I just discussed that. How much revenue did you make from each practice area? You need to look at that because in going forward, you need to know which of your practice areas were most profitable. 15 minutes goes really fast. I'm going to go through this as quickly as I can. Which practice areas were most profitable? And going forward, you need to be aware of that. How do you determine profits? Which ones were the most fulfilling in terms of enjoyment versus the revenue produced? It may be the least revenue producing area of practice is the one you enjoy the most. Should you shed that area? It may be your best expert. You may be an expert in that area more than any other areas. Which were the least fulfilling or troublesome? Those are the ones you want to look hard at, and maybe you should think about shedding them. Do you have a way of tracking referrals? Look to providing for some source, some way of thanking your referral sources going forward and marketing to those sources. This should be in your strategic planning and year end. And looking at that, where did you get your referrals? Is your practice spending wisely? Is your rent too high? Boy, it's easy to get stuck in that loop, especially if you have a escalating rent. We had gross rent in our last office space, and it started off really great, and it was a 3% rider every year, and after 13 years, it got to be kind of expensive. Do you take a regular what about payroll? Are you well-staffed, overstaffed? Do you need help? Do you take regular salary from the firm? Or do you drain the swamp each month? If you're in a solo, you can do what you want, but if you're in a firm, draining the swamp means you take a look at the end of the month or maybe mid-month and you say, okay, we've got X dollars and here's what we need for the rest of the month, next 2-week period or 30-day period. Let's take everything else out, or let's take everything out because we know we're going to have this coming in. It's probably better to plan on a salary, even if you're not in a professional corporation where you have a salary. By that I mean figure out a draw and use that every month and take out quarterly payments for bonuses that coincide with your tax situation. And if you're not doing that, plan on it as part of your strategic planning. Plan on, I'm not going to get into this, it's self-explanatory, and cases, areas of practice. Are you realistically able to shed problem areas? If you are getting a lot of court referrals of criminal matters and you're in a small community and there are very few lawyers to go around, you may not be able to realistically shed those court referrals, even if you despise criminal law. Family law, in that same on the defense side of it. Family law matters. A lot of lawyers can't stand family law, but it does yield other business and can be profitable, but it's also often a case of where you've got high accounts receivable. Payroll costs and rent are your highest expenses. Take a serious look at those going forward. And then do you need to add lawyers or do you want to add lawyers? Look at your 5-year plan. Where do you want to be in 5 years? Adding associates, if they're right out of law school, a lot of on-the-job training, CLE, a lot of mentoring. Make sure you understand that. That's a time buster for the senior lawyers in the firm. But it does add new blood to a firm, which is usually very beneficial to a firm, and especially if you're in a small firm and you can't find somebody to take over your practice, practice transition opportunity is very beneficial. Lateral transfers work and they don't work. It depends on who the lateral transfer is and whether they're bringing any business and caseload with them. If the worst thing is to bring in a lateral that has no caseload, and then you have to subsidize that lateral for a period of time, even if they've got expertise. And how to structure. Accounts receivable, do you see your own clients? Again, I'm not going to get into that, but you all discuss that every year. Lawyer to lawyer profitability review. We've talked about, you need to look at that sincerely. You may have a lawyer who's spending half the time but is making twice as much income, and be careful on getting on their backs because they're carrying the firm even though it may not look like it on a time basis. And conversely, you may have somebody who's working a lot of hours and not producing what they should be. Retirement, do you have lawyers who should be retiring? I mean, I'm getting up there in years. I promised a few years more to my partners. Lastly, did you take any time off last year? Was it planned or was it sufficient to unwind and recharge? Were you able to actually get away from your practice, shut off your phone, shut off your computer, shut off the web? Plan for that. Put that in your budget. Put that in your strategic plan for the next year, the next 2 years, because you need that time off. The worst thing is to retire and find out you never took any time off and die the next day. Make sure you take off, and I had a law partner that happened to. I'm not going to go through the rest of it. I've got to turn this over to Jeff. Jeff, if you want to come down and take.
Thank you, Bill. I'm Jeff Lapin. I'm the actual chair of the Law Practice Management section, and I appreciate Reg, Jeanelle, and Bill for participating in this seminar. I have the law practice management considerations that excludes big picture items that Bill just talked about, personnel issues, and tax issues. I can have everything else. The way I kind of look at year-end planning, you look at the past to help predict the future. It's the best you could do. Because you never know what's going to happen, especially my type of work. 99% of the cases I do are contingency basis. I need bad weather for car accidents because that gives me more business. We have a bad winter, more likely to have more clients. I can't predict the weather, but I kind of look at the past and even look at weather patterns. How many snows did we have? It's a lot more car accidents than snow. But you look at the past to help predict the future in both your review and planning for the future. I kind of broke it down into three main questions that are kind of interrelated. And again, I'm excluding certain items. What are your goals for the next year? How did it do last year? Basically a review. And then can it be improved? Goal setting. There's lots of different ways to set goals. I just put goal setting in a Google search, and the one that came up the most was the SMART method of doing it. You want to set goals that are specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and timely. The goals were more of a Bill area, so that's why I don't have a whole bunch on that, but you can do that with regard to your, stuff we'll get to later, your software, your computers, where your office is, expansion, all those different things, personnel. Now in the review, the way I look at the review is you have both objective and subjective criteria. For objective criteria, is something you can measure. You can test, you can determine if it's correct or not correct, if something, a goal has been met or not met. So you can use benchmarks or metrics. Hopefully you've done prior year reviews and set goals so you can see if you've met those goals. And both looking at the goals for past year, what goals you set for the next year. You can do a comparative analysis. You can look at other firms of similar size and makeup and what they're doing, if they'll tell you. I know I got a survey from, it was a bigger firm than mine, asking about what they're paying legal assistants. And he contacted 5 or 6 lawyers, and because I gave him information, he gave me the averages that he came up with. He didn't tell me who said what, who was the high, who was the low, but I got information from him. You can do a cost-benefit analysis in your review. And cost isn't just money, it's also time. If you switch software, it takes a lot of time to train people to use that new software. It takes time to just look for new things, versus the benefit. Then you have to make sure everything that you're doing is legal, because statutes change, laws change, and you may have to do something differently. And then you also have to make sure it's ethical. That especially relates to like marketing issues. Nebraska does not have a whole bunch of opinions regarding online advertising. So you got to kind of check to make sure what you're doing is ethical, that no new opinions come out, that what you're doing now is still ethical. And I would point out that the ABA Model Rule 1.1 comment, which is now comment 8 plus 6, specifically includes that lawyers should maintain the requisite knowledge and skill, including the benefits and risks associated with relevant technology. Nebraska has not adopted this comment yet. However, in an article I wrote, I think the July-August edition of the Nebraska Lawyer, I believe we have that duty already. The court requires us to provide an email address. We have to electronically pay our bar dues. We no longer get to mail them in. We have to log online. We have to do our CLE online. So I think the court is getting there. I have yet to see an opinion that specifically reprimanded an attorney for a technology issue, but my guess is it will be coming. I believe there's at least 24, 25 states that have adopted this comment so far. So you measured it objectively. Has it done what you wanted it to do? The benchmarks, all those things. But then you also have the subjective. You have the lawyer perspective, you have the staff perspective, and the client perspective. Do you like that software? Do you like that process? Do you like what your office space is like? That makes a big difference. If you're stuck in a windowless room or cubicle, you're probably not going to be very happy when you see all these nice weather days that we've had today. But that makes a difference. Most importantly is the clients. Are your clients happy with the work you're producing for them, whether it be a contract, your communication methods, all of those things. So I think the subjective part of your review is just as important. Do they like the software? Is it easy to use? Do they like the new copier? Whatever it might be. And then improvement. That's just a whole bunch of synonyms for improvement. And somehow the NT fell to the bottom. And I put it, capitalized, it can be anything. It can be a product, a service, a personnel, a system, or a process. So any of those things. So you look, when you're doing your review and planning for the future, you look at all of those items. Say you do just wills and trusts. Are you producing a good product? Are you providing good service for, like me, personal injury representation? Is your personnel, have you met all your personnel needs? Are you missing something? Is someone not performing where they should? And can they be trained to do better? You look at your systems in place. And systems and process are relatively similar. Do you have a good intake system? Are calls handled in the same basic manner? Do you have a good plan or files being set up? My office scanned 99% of everything we get. The only thing we don't scan is junk mail. So everything gets scanned and gets put into our case management software. So we have a process in place how it gets there. That if we don't want to do it ourselves, we know where to scan it to Jill, my assistant, and she knows where to put it and how to label it. We have relatively similar naming conventions, but it's close enough that we can all understand what it is. And that. And improved, the question was, can it be improved? Improved means it can be updated, replaced, made more productive. Can it be made less expensive? Make sure it's illegal and ethical, or can it be more liked and appreciated? That's the subjective part of things. Now, specific considerations. I broke this down into internal items within your firm and external. Internal generally relates to governance and management. Do you have a good management structure in place? The types of monthly meetings that Bill may have suggested for a larger firm, like I have one associate and I operate as a sole proprietor, so I don't need to have necessarily the same meetings that a partnership would have or a larger firm would have. Are you happy with the administration and back office work? Are you happy with your systems and processes and marketing? markets, at least for every firm markets itself in some way, shape, or form. It's just some of us do it differently because of how we get our clients. If you have institutional clients, then we're always going to come to you like insurance defense. Your marketing is making sure the insurance company is happy with the work that you're producing. For me, I have to compete with all the other personal injury lawyers. And just some of the items that would fall within the administration back office: technology updates, upgrades, cybersecurity, making sure that you have a good conflict checking system in place. You have good reporting systems that you can get the information you need for your monthly meetings to figure out what's gone on in a case. You have a good system for file storage. Because we scan everything, and we're now, when a case is closed, asking a client if they want all their medical information. Rather than us keeping it, we're just now asking them, if you want it, take it. If you don't, within 7 days, we're going to shred it because we have a scanned copy of it that's backed up. So it would take quite a bit. It would take, I believe, at least 3 natural disasters, no more than that. I think it would take 5 huge natural disasters for us not to be able to retrieve our data, including Lincoln, and then wherever Amazon keeps all that stuff. So we're relatively safe on that. Your systems and processes, again, cybersecurity, you have good intake system, good automation, in-place document assembly, you have a good closing and archiving system, good client service, and look at your forms. Statutes change, or your forms now up to date with the current laws and regulations. Marketing, you look at your referrals, your branding, your advertising, your website, and your reviews and testimonials. Technology considerations, which is a big one. I think technology in lots of ways speeds things up, especially once you understand how everything works. But you sometimes have to make a decision between upgrading to the latest version of something, or upgrading, or switching. Like I have a case management system that I've had since I opened in 2008. It's based on in my server. I'm looking at cloud-based solutions. The problem is getting my data into that cloud system. That's the problem I'm having. And just looking at your physical location considerations, kind of what Bill discussed, lease versus own, maintenance issues. All those items are things you could just consider just with your office space. Then you have external marketing and your vendors. If you marketing is in there because if you're outsourcing your marketing efforts. And then your vendors. Marketing, Google yourself a couple of times, maybe once a month. Figure out if people saying good or bad things about you. You'd be surprised what's on there. Correcting errors and omissions. And then you have to figure out a way that how you want to handle a negative review. I actually got 2 this year. One from the husband of somebody that we sued for a car accident. And another one who I have no idea why they gave me a negative review. We've had no contact with them whatsoever. And then you look at your vendors, your insurance, malpractice, health, workers' compensation. Do you have an adequate coverage? Do you have too much coverage? Can you find it cheaper? Look at your deductibles, your IT tech support. If you use a staffing service, your marketing, if you outsource it, your payroll and taxes. Can you find it cheaper? Are they meeting your needs? Are they doing it legal and ethical? Have you looked at your agreements to make sure, like your IT people, aren't looking at your confidential information regarding your clients? And I think I'm close about to my time. Any questions for me on those items? I want quick, but we'll have 15 minutes. Jeanelle.
Thank you, Jeff. Jeanelle Lust will be discussing the human resources compensation and evaluation issues.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jeanelle Lust, and I've been the managing partner for Knudsen, Berkheimer, Richardson, and Endacott for the past 11 years. And so I was asked to talk about human resources compensation and evaluation issues. as of year end. And so the first thing that pops into my head when we're talking about year end is it's time for vacation. Everybody's trying to use up their PTO and vacation time before the end of the year. So what type of problems does that cause for your law firm, and is there anything that you can do about it? The first thing you want to look at is under the Wage Payment and Collection Act in Nebraska, vacation time is considered wages, and so is PTO time. So that means if you terminate an employee, you have to pay them their accrued but unused vacation time and PTO time. And there's no getting around that. You cannot put in your employee manual that if you didn't give us 2 weeks notice, we don't owe you your vacation time. That's not allowed under the Act. It's not allowed by the Nebraska Supreme Court. So what does that mean? It means that it is to your financial benefit to make sure that your employees do not have a whole bunch of vacation time accrued that you are going to have to pay out should you ever let that employee go or should that employee leave. So what kind of problems does that cause? Lots of people are then tempted to have a vacation accrual policy that says if you don't use the vacation by the end of the year, you lose it. It's my opinion, and a couple other people that have written on this issue, is that once a wage is earned, it's earned. And you cannot take that away under the Act. So we really recommend that people have a vacation policy that instead of having a use it or lose it policy, you simply say if you have built up more than 4 weeks of vacation that you have not used, you don't accrue any more vacation until you've used up some of that vacation. So that solves the problem of massive accrual of vacation. It solves the problem of having to argue that your use it or lose it policy is going to cause you some sort of problem down the road. The other thing people start to look at year end, because they have employees, they have associates that are wanting to use all of this vacation up, why don't we just close? Because that way you don't owe anybody wages if you're not open. And I do know some law firms that have done that. They've said from Christmas until New Year's, couldn't remember the word for that for a second, we're just going to be closed and we're not going to pay anybody. First thing, for anybody that's a salaried employee, like your associates, you have to be closed a week or longer for you not to pay a salaried employee their wages. So if you're only closed for 4 days, you're still going to owe all of those salaried employees their entire wages during the period. So if you're primarily staffed by salaried employees, you're probably going to be closed longer than you would want to be if you adopted that policy. And then, you know, your hourly employees, if they're not working and they don't want to use up any PTO during the time period that you're closed, you don't have to pay them, but come on, it's Christmas. So, you know, just for employee morale purposes, I guess I would recommend against such a policy. But if you really realize in looking at your years past that week between Christmas and New Year's you get absolutely nothing done, you're not billing anything, and it's not profitable to be open, you might as well have the lights off and share and save on the electric bill, then go for it, and at least your hourly staff you will not have to pay during that time period. The other thing that comes up supposedly at year end is evaluations, and that's an issue I've been asked to talk about. One of the things that I kind of have a unique perspective on is I became the managing partner of a 130-year-old firm when I was 38 years old. And so I found that my biggest HR challenge was older attorneys that had done the same thing the same way for 40 years and didn't necessarily want to do it any other way. And one of the things that I really thought it was important to do was start doing really comprehensive evaluations of our staff. And so I started handing out said comprehensive evaluations about the 1st of December and said, I want these back by the end of the year. And they were 5-page evaluations. And the first pushback I got on that was, I'm not going to give my secretary a bad evaluation because she'll just be mad at me. The second level of pushback I got on that was, I have too much to get done, it's the end of the year. So first thing they did, just kind of circled around, and I was able to convince some people that the most important thing you can do for staff and your staff relationship is actually give them a fair evaluation. People actually want feedback, positive or negative. They want to know if they're doing a good job. And frankly, if they're not doing a good job, a poor evaluation is great evidence when you have to fire that person to take to the unemployment compensation review board and say, look at this evaluation, and this is why they had to be let go if they were consistently bad evaluations, and then this thing happens. The other thing is, you know, it's a great defense to any civil rights discrimination type cases if you have evaluations that are not good in the file. You can show that you fired that person for non-discriminatory reasons. The other thing I did is I decided that the evaluation was just too long and nobody was going to do it if it was a 5-page evaluation. So I just went to a scale of 1 to 5, asking 4 questions. Do they have a good attitude? Are they productive for the firm? Are they competent in their job? And do they have an acceptance of innovation? Now, that last one was an invention of my own because not only do I have partners that, at least at the time, were a lot older than me, I also had secretaries a lot older than me, and I hope she's not listening to the webinar. But you know, when we switched from having a mailing machine, an actual stamper in our office, to using stamps.com, she was literally in my office crying because it was a change. And I said, you know, this is supposed to be making your job easier. And so I wanted that added as an evaluation, because as technology has changed and as you can really benefit with the practice, I think we want people that can adapt to using new technology, and that we don't find, you know, are trying to do mailings by running sticky notes through the copier, but are really actually using the technology we're going to provide. And if we aren't staffed that way, you know, we have to really evaluate whether it's worth our time to invest in the innovation if we don't have anybody that's going to use it. And then and we asked for comments, just a sentence or 2 on each one of those things to make it easy for everybody. And we also added a section for other comments that they might want to make. Found shortening it up definitely led to more compliance, but here's what really changed the game and made it a lot easier to get those evaluations in, was that we don't do them at the end of the year anymore. We do them in June. And we do staff salary raises as of July 1. Now, that doesn't mean that you can't budget for the possible staff increase and possible staff associate pay increases at year end in December. You can, but you just budget in what the range you think it's going to be. But when you do this kind of stuff in June, people aren't on vacation. People aren't rushed trying to get all the stuff they need to get done by year end. They aren't worried about, you know, what present they're going to buy their uncle. And they actually take more time to do the evaluations. And we are able to, you know, spend more time with the employee comprehensively going over that evaluation and telling them what their increase is going to be in July. So just by those few little changes, I got more compliance, and I think it's working really well, at least for our firm. The other thing that I think firms should be doing at the end of the year is a checkup on your salary versus hourly employee compliance. You have to meet certain thresholds to be a salaried employee. And generally in law firms, your law firm administrator and your associates are the only people that qualify to be salaried employees. Generally, your paralegals and your secretaries do not qualify to be salaried employees. So what does that mean? I have a paralegal, and I'm sure most of you do too, that carries around a smartphone. And she has access to email on it. She has access to text on it. I can call her when I want to. But the problem with that is if I call her after 8 to 5 because she's an hourly employee, technically she's owed for that time that she is checking her email or answering her phone or whatever after work, or if she's responding to email over the lunch hour or working through her lunch hour. So the end of the year is a good time to just check that you're circling back with your hourly employees and telling them, we don't want you working overtime. That means I don't want you to check your email after 5 o'clock. Even if I send it to you, I don't want you to read it until you get in the next morning. The other important thing about overtime and hourly employees is if they work it, you owe it. So even if you have a policy in your employee manual that says no overtime unless it's approved, if they worked it, you still have to pay it. You can discipline them for not getting approval for working the overtime, but you still need to do it. So I would take some time at the end of the year and just check back with those type of employees, make sure they're not logging in to the cloud at home, make sure they're not answering emails and texts that are work related. And the reason this is so important is we have seen 2 or 3 cases come up that in our office where the employee just downloaded an app onto their phone and started tracking the amount of time that they claimed to be spending working at home. And it's a really easy app. Every time you press a button on the phone, it counts the hours. And they came back and said, you owe, after they got fired, of course, you owe me this time and a half for all of this time that I worked afterwards. And I think we all know that law tends to be a 24/7 job, at least for the attorneys, but we have to really avoid the temptation of making that a similar for our staff. So, are there any questions? I think I hit my 15 minutes. All right.
And last, certainly not least, Reginald Kuhn. Otherwise, Reg.
Thanks, Bill. I want to apologize. I'm battling a cold, so I will try to speak as loud as I can, but I've been having this for 2 weeks and can't get hold of it. I also do not have a PowerPoint presentation. Bill was very generous when I came in and said I was old school. I think dinosaur is probably more appropriate. But what I want to talk about in our time together is just some year-end tax planning strategies that a smaller or solo practitioner might want to look at, and also a couple maybe compliance issues that we often see come up at the end of the year as far as tax reporting. So I want to talk about that just a little bit. I think if you Googled year-end tax planning for small businesses, you would probably uniformly find accelerate your deductions, postpone your income. And that is a good strategy, but in the practice of law, it may not be quite as neatly fit into how we do business. First of all, for example, we're not a farmer, so I can't decide to not sell my corn until January 1st. That kind of business has the option to do that. We are a personal service, and we don't have as much control over our when our income comes in after we send our bills out to our clients. And I've never turned down a client who came to the office on December 31 with their check in hand. So we don't have quite as much control as maybe some other small businesses do, but that's certainly something you can consider at the end of the year. The other thing to remember is, particularly if you have business clients, the goal of postponing income may be directly in opposition to them wanting to accelerate their deductions, because they want to take the deduction this year and we want to postpone the income till next year. So always take that into consideration. The other thing to consider is prepaying expenses or accelerating expenses is a strategy that's often used, but once you start that, you may be making a lifetime commitment to that type of tax planning, because we can, in December, perhaps prepay some expenses, but then next year it'll be December again and we won't have maybe 12 months of expenses because we prepaid the January expenses. So I always counsel folks to make sure that if you decide to make prepayments, maybe it's in an extraordinary year, or maybe you select those expenses which are more of a reoccurring nature, that there will be that opportunity next year to make those prepayments again. Because again, I do a lot of ag work, so I'll use lots of farm analogies. I have farmers who are kind of stuck in prepayment now, because one year they did prepay their real estate taxes, they did all these prepayments, and now they can't get out of it because they continue to have income and they need the write-off. And I've had some clients say to me, well, how do I get out of this? And I said, well, unfortunately, you're going to have a really, really bad year as far as crop production, or the prices are going to be really, really bad. Now, this year maybe there's some of that can go on. The other thing you need to consider, and Bill talked about this a little bit, is it's so easy in December to just say, I've got to make these quick reactions, I've got to do A, B, C to cut my tax bill down, but you really have to take, tax planning really should be a year-round process, and you've got to take into consideration, are there some contingent cases out there that in 2017, I'm pretty sure if we have a good result, they're going to come into fruition. Are there some unbilled projects that I know are going to come into next year? It's so easy sometimes to get really concentrated on trying to reduce the income this year or get the expenses, and not step back and say, hey, does this make sense? And also on a practical matter, this year particularly with the change of administration, who knows what the taxes are going to be next year? That's always an unknown, but it would appear that there may be some tax reductions next year, so especially in rates. So you need to take that in consideration as you decide to either accelerate deductions or postpone income. But what are some things that you can do, that are still available to all of us? Again, I already talked about this. If you are going to prepay some expenses, try to pick some that are reoccurring. Your health insurance, maybe the bill came in December, it's not really due till January. Some of those things that next December you would still have the same invoice and could make a decision. I would not, for general operating other expenses, again, you really have to consider whether accelerating those deductions makes sense. We still also, I mean, if you do need a new copier, a new laptop, some equipment that traditionally has been known as depreciable assets, Section 179, the write-off at the start is still available to all of us. So again, that's something, if you were going to purchase it anyway, this might be a good time of year to go ahead and make that purchase. You know, over the years there's been some, you know, whether 179 was going to stay or go. It appears it's going to be pretty permanent, and the current, or the incoming administration certainly has indicated that they like to give businesses the opportunity to write off capital assets. So I think that's always something you can look at. Another one that you might look at, again, I'm assuming that you can meet the business use requirements, but purchasing certain vehicles, particularly big vehicles, big pickup trucks, some of those vehicles, there are still some tax planning opportunities to be able to write a significant part of the cost of those type of vehicles off. It really depends on your practice. You still have got to be able to document that it's used more than 50% for business. So, but depending on your situation, that can be still a good planning technique if you need a new vehicle and you've had a really good year, and what am I going to do to try to mitigate the taxes. Another thing that frankly we've done in the last 2 or 3 years, I'm sure we all advance cost to clients, and sometimes for whatever reason those costs don't get collected. It's really easy to let those things just kind of sit there and nobody really pays attention to them. You know, just going through your ledgers and saying, are there some things here that I've got to be really honest with myself, I'm not going to get paid. This is a good time of year to do that. Other tax thing I talk about is, and Bill talked about this a little bit, retirement planning. At the end of the year, there's still some strategies available to us for retirement. It can be as simple as, there's the old tradition, a lot of us, I assume in our audience are small practitioners or solo practitioners. If you don't want to go through the expense of setting up a pension plan or a retirement plan, IRAs are still out there. You can put $5,500 a year away. Depending on your spouse's situation, you may be able to do something for them also. And the nice thing about that is you don't really have to come up with the money till April 15th when your return is due. Little caveat there on IRAs, you got to fund them by April 15th, even if, like lots of us do as attorneys, we extend our tax return. That's one thing you can't, even if you extend your tax return to get it filed, you got to make your contribution by April 15th. If you self-employed, a lot of us are considered self-employed. SEP still, self-employed pension plans are still out there. The nice thing about them also is you don't have to do those by the end of the year. You can wait till your tax return is done. And also on those, you can actually wait till, if you extend your return, till the actual extended due date for those type of plans. Those still offer some significant savings for self-employed folks. It's basically the lesser of 25% of your income, or $53,000, subject to some adjustments, which we're not going to get into here. But that's still an attractive vehicle, particularly for solo practitioners. Remember, if you have employees and you have a SEP plan, you've got to include those in your contributions. You cannot discriminate and say, I'm the attorney, I'm the owner, I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to do it for my staff people. So sometimes that can or cannot be seen as a detriment to a SEP plan, but they still are a vehicle. The nice thing now is we can actually do them through set up individual IRAs. A couple compliance issues that come up this time of year. I really want to talk about 1099s just a minute. Sole practitioners and small businesses, a lot of us unfortunately end up doing our 1099s. And just to review, you need to do a 1099 if you pay any person who provided work or personal service to you over the course of the year and it was more than $600. The only exception to that rule is if the payment was made to a corporation, and even in that exception, if the corporation provides legal services or health care, even corporations are supposed to get the 1099 from us. And we've been seeing this come up. I do quite a bit of IRS audit work. This has been coming up with small businesses, so that's why I just want to touch on it a little bit. That's why I know if you're the managing partner, sometimes you get these W-9s from a vendor and want you to fill it out. The reason they want you to fill it out is because they want to know if they got to send you a 1099 or not. So, you know, it might be a good practice to get that from anybody that you're doing business with. Some of the things some of the folks we don't think about in doing 1099s. If you pay an expert witness, they should get a 1099 from your law firm. If you have some sort of fee splitting arrangement with another attorney, they should get a 1099. One that I'm not always been the best at, if you do estate work and you did actually all the accounting in your firm, you know, the PR fee, the trustee fee to an individual should get a 1099. So that's just something that, you know, needs to be looked at. Couple changes in that. It used to be the 1099 had to be sent to the recipient by January 31, but we had more time to get into the government. Actually, it was February 28th for most of them. That's done, well, for all practical purposes, that doesn't exist anymore. Everything needs to be sent by January 31, both to the recipient and to the government. That's because of identity fraud. The IRS wants 1099s and W-2s in their system much quicker than they used to, and that's a change for W-2s also. We used to have some lag time. Once in a while, I'll get a call. I got a 1099K. I accept credit cards. What is that? It's not, the only thing it is right now is for the IRS to keep a tab on a business's credit card receipts. And what they do with that information, if you have credit card receipts of $150,000 and you only reported gross receipts on your tax return of $125,000, you're probably going to have somebody knocking on your door saying, what's going on here? So that's why you get that. There is some thought that eventually we may have to actually put that information on our tax returns. I see my time's going really quickly. One other thing for tax returns, we as businesses are subject to the Nebraska personal property tax. And I was at a seminar on Thursday and Friday in Omaha, and Tony Fulton, the tax commissioner there, he had a couple interesting comments. One, he talked about use tax. And usually at Great Plains Tax Institute, I'm not saying this, but usually that's an indication maybe that's something people are going to look at. I think all of you are aware that if you buy something online and don't pay the sales tax, you're supposed to pay the use tax. And that's, I don't think it's any secret, a lot of that doesn't get paid. But personal property tax returns, again, as counties are really strapped for money, even though you buy the new computer and write it off and it's not on your depreciation schedule, you are supposed to still pay personal property tax to Lancaster County for that computer. And it's really easy to forget not to do that. And I just predict as our government entities are strapped for cash, that's something that we may be having to deal with some more. So I see my time is up, so thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Reg. Any questions? We wowed these this group.
Yeah.